When a 30-year-old CEO ordered security to tow a rusted pickup truck from her executive parking lot, she had no idea the quiet man in work clothes watching his vehicle get dragged away was worth more than her entire company. 2 hours later, her billion-dollar merger started crumbling, and the only person who could save her empire was the same man she'd just humiliated. This is a story about power, pride, and the devastating cost of judging people by what they drive instead of who they are. Stay until the end, hit that like button, and comment your city so I can see how far this story travels. The January wind off Lake Michigan didn't just blow through Chicago, it cut. At 6:47 a.m., the kind of cold that made your teeth ache had already settled over the financial district, turning the streets into corridors of frozen glass and steel. Inside the 43rd floor of Sterling Capital headquarters, Vanessa Sterling stood at her office window, watching the city wake up beneath her. She was 30 years old, CEO for 14 months, and today, she was about to close the biggest merger in her company's 60-year history. $2 billion. That's what the contracts on her desk represented. $2 billion that would transform Sterling Capital from a respected regional investment firm into a national powerhouse. The kind of deal that got written up in the Wall Street Journal. The kind that made people remember your name. Vanessa pressed her palm against the cold glass, feeling the tremor of wind against the building. She'd barely slept. Her reflection stared back at her, dark hair pulled into a tight bun, charcoal suit that cost more than most people's monthly rent, eyes that looked older than 30, eyes that had learned not to blink first. "Ms. Sterling?" Her assistant's voice crackled through the intercom. "The legal team is asking about the timeline for final review." Vanessa turned from the window. "Tell them 2 hours. I want every page checked again before the signing ceremony." "Yes, ma'am. Also, the caterers are here for setup and handle it, Michelle. That's what I pay you for." She knew she sounded harsh, didn't care. Today wasn't about being liked. It was about being ready. Her phone buzzed, a text from her father. "Don't screw this up. Thanks, Dad. Real inspiring." Robert Sterling had built this company from nothing, and he'd made it clear, painfully, repeatedly clear, that Vanessa had something to prove. Being his daughter got her in the door. Being young and female meant every investor, every board member, every smug gray-haired executive in a $1,000 tie was waiting for her to fail. She deleted the text without responding. The merger target was Garrison Financial, a West Coast firm with assets that would complement Sterling's portfolio perfectly. 6 months of negotiations, due diligence, legal reviews. Vanessa had personally overseen every detail, pushed through every obstacle, squeezed concessions out of Garrison's team until they barely had room to breathe. This was her deal, her moment. Nothing was going to ruin it. At 7:15 a.m., she headed down to the lobby to check the setup for the signing ceremony. The event planner had transformed the ground floor into something between a corporate showcase and a wedding reception. White tablecloths, champagne fountains, a podium with both companies' logos projected on a screen behind it. Investors would be arriving at noon, the press at 12:30, signing at 1 p.m. sharp. Vanessa walked through the space, mentally cataloging every detail. The flowers were wrong, too casual. She made a note to have them replaced. The lighting needed adjustment. Her phone rang. Marcus Webb, her head of security. "Yeah?" "Ms. Sterling, we've got a situation in the executive lot." She checked her watch. "What kind of situation?" "There's a vehicle parked in your reserved space. Old pickup truck. We've asked the driver to move it, but he's not being cooperative." Vanessa felt a spike of irritation cut through her focus. Today of all days, someone was playing games with parking spaces? "Then tow it." "Ma'am, the owner is standing right here. I thought you might want to—" "Marcus, I don't care if he's standing on his head singing the national anthem. That's my space. Have the truck towed. Now." She hung up before he could respond. Entitled people. That was the problem with Chicago. Everyone thought the rules didn't apply to them. Probably some contractor who figured an executive parking spot was fair game at 7 a.m. Well, he was about to learn otherwise. Vanessa returned to her office, dismissing the parking lot incident from her mind. She had actual problems to solve. The merger documents were nearly 400 pages of dense legal language, and while her lawyers had assured her everything was airtight, Vanessa had learned early in her career that assured wasn't the same as certain. She settled behind her desk and opened the contract to page 1. 30 minutes later, Michelle knocked and entered without waiting for permission. The truck's been towed. Security said the owner didn't even argue, just watched it happen and walked away. Vanessa didn't look up from the contract. Good. What else? Nothing. I just thought it was weird. Marcus said the guy was really calm about it, almost like he expected it. Michelle, I really don't care about some random contractor's emotional state. Do you have actual business to discuss? Her assistant hesitated. No, ma'am. Then please let me work. The door closed softly. Vanessa made it through another 6 pages before her concentration broke. She kept thinking about Michelle's comment, almost like he expected it. What kind of person watches their vehicle get towed and doesn't even protest? She shook her head. Focus. The merger. That's what mattered. By 9:30 a.m., the office was fully alive. Junior analysts rushing through hallways, senior partners conducting last-minute calls, administrative staff managing the chaos of preparing for an event that would determine the company's future. The energy felt electric, dangerous, like everyone knew they were part of something that could go brilliantly right or catastrophically wrong. Vanessa called her legal team into the conference room for a final review. 7 lawyers crowded around the massive oak table, each with their own copy of the merger agreement, each responsible for specific sections. Thomas Renwick, her chief counsel, ran the meeting with the enthusiasm of a man who'd been doing this for 30 years and was extremely tired. Governance structure is clean, he said, flipping through his notes. No issues with the board composition or voting rights. Financial disclosures match what we expected. The asset transfer schedules are— What about the integration timeline? Vanessa interrupted. Thomas adjusted his glasses. 12 months for full operational merger. That's standard for a deal this size. And the termination clauses? Mutual consent required. Penalty structures are symmetric. No unusual provisions. He paused. Vanessa, we've been through this contract 17 times. It's solid. She looked around the table at the 6 other lawyers. Everyone agree? Nods all around. Confident, expensive nods. All right, but I want one more complete read-through before signing. Split up the sections, check every cross-reference, every defined term. If there's something wrong, I want to know about it in the next 2 hours. Thomas sighed quietly but didn't argue. We'll get it done. The lawyers dispersed back to their offices, leaving Vanessa alone in the conference room. She walked to the window, a habit she'd developed over the past year. This need to look out over the city, to remind herself how high up she was, how far she could fall. 43 floors. That was a long way down. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was David Garrison himself, CEO of the company she was about to absorb. Vanessa, big day. How are you feeling? She recognized the tone, forced enthusiasm masking nervousness. David was 56, second-generation money, the kind of executive who'd inherited his position and spent 2 decades proving he deserved it. This merger was his exit strategy, a way to cash out before his company's performance started declining. Feeling good, David? Your team ready? Absolutely. We'll be there at noon. Listen, I wanted to thank you again for being so flexible during negotiations. I know we asked for some unusual provisions, and you really worked with us. Vanessa frowned. What unusual provisions? A pause. The integration schedule adjustments, the affiliate disclosure modifications. Your legal team signed off on everything. Right, of course. She kept her voice steady even as her mind raced. See you at noon, David. She hung up and immediately called Thomas back. What affiliate disclosure modifications is Garrison talking about? She heard papers rustling on the other end. Give me a second. There were some minor changes to the subsidiary reporting requirements in Section 12. Nothing major. Standard stuff for companies with complex corporate structures. Define minor changes. They requested that certain affiliate relationships be disclosed on a delayed timeline instead of immediately at closing. It's not uncommon when you're dealing with multiple holding companies, and, Thomas, I don't remember approving that. It came through in the 3rd revision, about 8 weeks ago. I can pull the memo if you want, but Vanessa, this is really standard practice. We see it in probably 60% of mergers this size. She wanted to believe him. Thomas had been with the firm for decades, had overseen hundreds of deals. But something felt wrong. That instinct she'd learned to trust, the one that had kept her from making stupid mistakes in an industry full of sharks, it was screaming at her now. Pull everything related to affiliate disclosures and bring it to my office. I want to see exactly what we agreed to. Vanessa, we're 3 hours from signing. If you're getting cold feet, I'm not getting cold feet. I'm being thorough. Isn't that what you're always telling the junior associates? Check everything twice? Yes, but then check it. Now. She hung up and stood there, staring at her phone, feeling the first whisper of real doubt. At 10:15 a.m., Michelle appeared in her doorway looking pale. Miss Sterling, there are some investors here asking to speak with you. They seem upset. Vanessa's stomach tightened. Which investors? The Hallstrom Group and Pembroke Capital. They're in conference room B. Those were two of Sterling's largest institutional investors. The fact that they'd shown up unannounced on the morning of the signing was not a good sign. Vanessa grabbed her phone and headed down the hall. Conference room B had glass walls, and through them she could see 4 men in suits standing around the table, all of them wearing expressions that ranged from concerned to openly hostile. She opened the door. Gentlemen, I wasn't expecting you until the ceremony. Richard Hallstrom turned to face her. He was 60, built like a former linebacker, with a reputation for destroying companies that disappointed him. We need to talk about this merger, Vanessa. What about it? We've been reviewing the terms, and we have some serious concerns about the integration structure. Vanessa kept her expression neutral. My legal team has vetted every aspect of this deal. If you have specific questions, how much control are we giving Garrison's affiliates after the merger closes? This came from Peter Yates, Pembroke's managing director. None. We're acquiring them, not the other way around. That's not what our analysts are telling us. Richard pulled out a tablet and turned it toward her. According to this breakdown of the governance structure, there are provisions that would give Garrison's parent company significant influence over Sterling's board within 18 months. Vanessa felt ice spreading through her chest. That's not possible. We structured this specifically to maintain full control. Then explained Section 12, Subsection 14, Clause 9. She didn't have the contract memorized to that level of detail. None of the CEOs did. That's what lawyers were for. But the fact that her investors were quoting specific clauses meant they'd found something her own legal team had either missed or failed to flag. Give me an hour, she said. Let me review the language you're concerned about, and I'll have answers. Vanessa, we're not trying to kill this deal. Richard's voice softened slightly. But we've invested heavily in Sterling, and we're not going to sit quietly while you hand control to a third party. If there are problems in this contract, we need to know before you sign anything. Understood. 1 hour. She left the conference room walking steadily, refusing to let anyone see the panic building behind her eyes. Back in her office, she pulled up the merger agreement on her computer and navigated to Section 12. The language was dense, technical, designed to be boring, which was exactly how you hid dangerous provisions. Bury them in legitimate-sounding corporate governance language that made even experienced lawyers' eyes glaze over. She read through subsection 14 3 times before she found it. Clause 9. It looked innocuous at first glance, just a standard provision about how the merged company would handle relationships with affiliated entities. But the way it was worded, the specific sequencing of conditions and exceptions. Vanessa grabbed her phone and called Thomas. I need you in my office right now. Bring everyone who reviewed Section 12. Vanessa, I'm in the middle of now, Thomas. 5 minutes later, her office was crowded with lawyers, all of them looking confused and slightly irritated at being summoned. Vanessa pointed at her computer screen. Section 12, subsection 14, clause 9. Explain it to me like I'm 5 years old. Thomas leaned in and read silently for a moment. It's a standard affiliate relationship clause. If Garrison has corporate relationships with other entities, this defines how those relationships get managed post-merger. What entities specifically? It doesn't specify. That's normal. You can't list every potential business relationship in a merger contract. So Garrison could have affiliates we don't know about? Technically, but the disclosure requirements would... He stopped. His face changed. Hold on. He grabbed his own copy of the contract and started flipping pages frantically. 2 of the junior lawyers exchanged worried glances. Thomas? What did you find? The disclosure timeline. It's... The way this is structured, if Garrison has affiliate relationships that weren't disclosed prior to closing, they're not required to reveal them until after the integration period is complete, which is 18 months. Yes, but that doesn't mean they have actual control. It just means we might not know about all their corporate relationships right away. Vanessa felt her pulse hammering. Unless those affiliate relationships include governance provisions that we agreed to honor as part of the merger. The room went very quiet. One of the junior lawyers, a woman named Sarah Park, spoke up hesitantly. If Garrison's affiliates have pre-existing governance agreements with Garrison, and we're absorbing Garrison's entire corporate structure, then technically those agreements would transfer to us as well. But we'd still have majority control, Thomas insisted. The board composition is clearly defined. We maintain... For the first 12 months, Vanessa interrupted. After that, there's a rebalancing provision tied to integration milestones. What happens if those milestones trigger changes to board composition and Garrison's affiliates have governance rights we don't know about yet? Thomas was sweating now. That would require a very specific set of circumstances, all aligned perfectly to what? To transfer control of my company to someone else? No one answered. Vanessa looked around the room at 7 highly paid lawyers who suddenly looked like students who'd forgotten to study for the final exam. "Get out," she said quietly. "All of you except Thomas. Out." The office emptied. Thomas stood there, gripping his copy of the contract, his knuckles white. "Tell me the truth," Vanessa said. "Is this a trap?" "I don't know. That's not good enough, Thomas. We're 2 hours from signing a deal that might give away this entire company. I need better than I don't know. Then I need time to review the full governance structure, trace every conditional provision, map out how the board composition could shift under different scenarios. That's days of work, Vanessa. Maybe weeks. We don't have weeks. We have 2 hours. That's not enough." "Then we're screwed." She sat down heavily in her chair. "We're completely screwed." Thomas was silent for a moment. Then he said something that made everything worse. "There's someone who might be able to help." "Who?" "Ethan Calloway." Vanessa looked at him blankly. "Who the hell is Ethan Calloway?" "He used to work in finance, specialized in merger arbitrage and corporate governance. He was legendary for finding problems in contracts that everyone else missed. If there's a trap in this agreement, Calloway could find it." "Great. Call him." "That's the problem. He left the industry years ago, completely disappeared. I heard he's somewhere in the Chicago area, but he doesn't take corporate work anymore. Won't even return calls." Vanessa wanted to scream. "Why are you telling me about someone who won't help us?" "Because if anyone can understand this contract in 2 hours, it's him. And if you can convince him to look at it..." Thomas shrugged helplessly. "It's the only chance we have." "Fine. How do I find him?" Thomas pulled out his phone and scrolled through his contacts. "I don't have a current number, but I know someone who might. Give me 20 minutes. Vanessa nodded and Thomas hurried out of the office. She sat there alone, looking at the merger documents on her screen, feeling the weight of $2 billion pressing down on her like physical force. Her entire career had been building toward this moment. Every sacrifice, every 18-hour workday, every relationship she'd neglected or abandoned, all of it was supposed to pay off today. And now it was falling apart. Her phone buzzed. A text from her father. "Investors are calling me. What's going on?" She stared at the message, imagining his face when she told him the deal was dead. Or worse, when she told him she'd signed away the company he'd spent 40 years building. She didn't respond. 11 minutes later, Thomas burst back into her office. "I found him, or at least I found where he works." "Where?" "A repair shop across the river, place called Calloway's Auto. My contact says he owns it, does mechanical work. Won't discuss finance, won't take meetings, but he's there most days." Vanessa was already grabbing her coat. "Let's go." "Vanessa, I don't think showing up unannounced is the right approach. This guy specifically left the corporate world. He's not going to respond well to..." "I don't care what he responds well to. We're out of options and out of time." She was halfway to the elevator before Thomas caught up with her. The repair shop was in a neighborhood Vanessa had never visited, on a street where the buildings looked tired and the people looked wary. Her Mercedes stood out like a diamond in a coal mine, drawing stares from every corner. Callaway's Auto occupied a converted warehouse with bay doors and hand-painted signs advertising engine work and transmission repair. Nothing fancy, nothing corporate, a world away from the glass towers Vanessa operated in. She parked in front and sat there for a moment, trying to figure out what the hell she was going to say to convince a hermit mechanic to save her company in the next 90 minutes. Thomas waited in the car. "Want me to come with you?" "No, stay here." She got out and walked toward the entrance, her heels clicking on the cracked pavement. Inside, the shop smelled like motor oil and metal. 2 vehicles were up on lifts, and tools covered every available surface. Classic rock played from a radio somewhere in the back. A young woman in coveralls looked up from where she was working on an engine. "Help you?" "I'm looking for Ethan Callaway." "He's in the back bay. We don't do walk-ins, though. If you need work done, you have to—" "I don't need my car fixed. I need to talk to him about a business matter." The woman's expression turned skeptical. "He doesn't do business meetings. Please, it's urgent." The woman studied her for a moment, taking in the expensive coat and the desperation Vanessa was trying to hide. Then she shrugged. "Back bay, through that door. But don't say I didn't warn you." "Warn?" Vanessa walked through the shop, passing tool chests and parts bins, until she reached an open bay where a man stood at a workbench, completely focused on the engine component he was examining. Ethan Callaway. He looked nothing like what Vanessa expected. No expensive suit, no corporate polish, just faded jeans, a worn flannel shirt with the sleeves rolled up, and hands covered in grease. He was maybe 32, with dark hair and the kind of calm intensity that suggested he didn't rattle easily. He didn't look up when she entered. "Mr. Callaway? Shop's closed for walk-ins. Emma should have told you." "She did. I'm not here about car repairs." Now he glanced at her, and for just a second, something flickered across his face. Recognition, maybe. Or surprise. But it vanished before Vanessa could read it clearly. "Not interested," he said, returning to his work. "You don't know what I'm going to ask." "Don't need to. If you're here, it's about corporate something. Contract review, governance consultation, merger arbitrage. And I don't do that work anymore." "Even in an emergency?" "Especially in emergencies. That's when people make the worst decisions." Vanessa felt her frustration rising. "My company is about to sign a merger that might be designed to steal control from us. I have 90 minutes to figure out if that's true, and I was told you're the only person in Chicago who could understand the contract fast enough to help." Ethan set down the engine part and finally turned to face her fully. His eyes were sharp, evaluating. "Who are you merging with?" "Garrison Financial." Something changed in his expression. Not much, but enough. "David Garrison." "You know him?" "I know his reputation, which means you should walk away from this deal." "I can't. We're too far in. Investors are waiting. Press is scheduled. Everything is ready." "Then you've already made your decision. You don't need me." He turned back to his workbench, dismissing her. Vanessa stood there, watching him work, feeling the seconds tick away. 90 minutes. That's all she had left before her entire life imploded. And then she remembered something Michelle had said earlier. The owner didn't even argue, just watched it happen and walked away. She looked at Ethan Callaway standing at his workbench, working on an engine in a converted warehouse, deliberately choosing this life over whatever he'd left behind in the corporate world. "You're the truck," she said quietly. He paused, not turning around. "What?" "This morning. The pickup truck in the executive parking lot, that was yours." Now he did turn, and his expression was completely unreadable. "I had it towed," Vanessa continued. "I didn't ask questions, didn't care who you were. Just saw an old truck where it didn't belong and ordered security to haul it away." Ethan's voice was soft, almost gentle. "And now you need something from me." The weight of that simple statement hit her like a physical blow. The humiliation of realizing she'd judged someone so completely wrong, and now her entire company depended on whether he was willing to help her anyway. "Yes," she said, because what else could she say? Ethan looked at her for a long moment. Then he pulled a rag from his pocket and started wiping the grease from his hands. "You looked at my truck this morning," he said quietly, "and decided exactly how much I mattered." Vanessa had no answer for that, because he was absolutely right. "I'm sorry," she finally managed. "I was wrong." "You weren't wrong. You just didn't care." He tossed the rag onto the workbench and walked past her toward the front of the shop. Vanessa stood there, unsure whether he was leaving or whether she should follow. Then his voice came from the other room. "You bringing those contracts or not?" She hurried after him. Thomas was still in the car looking anxious. When he saw Vanessa emerge with Ethan, his eyebrows shot up. "You're Ethan Calloway?" Thomas said, staring. "Used to be." Ethan looked at Vanessa. "How much time do we have?" 87 minutes. "Then stop wasting them. Let's go." They drove back to Sterling Capital in Vanessa's Mercedes. Ethan silent in the passenger seat, Thomas in the back feeding him details about the merger. Vanessa kept her eyes on the road, acutely aware of the man sitting next to her, the man she'd dismissed as irrelevant just a few hours earlier. Back at headquarters, they commandeered the largest conference room. Ethan declined coffee, declined small talk, just asked for the complete merger agreement and a quiet place to read. Vanessa and Thomas watched as he settled into a chair and opened the document on his laptop. No notes, no highlighters, just reading, page after page, his expression never changing. 40 minutes passed, then 50. Vanessa checked her watch obsessively, calculating how much time they had left, wondering if this was all pointless. Then Ethan spoke. "Who negotiated the integration timeline?" Thomas looked up from his own laptop. "What about it? Who specifically negotiated the 12-month integration period and the rebalancing provisions?" "That would have been our M&A team, working with Garrison's corporate development group." "Why?" Ethan didn't answer immediately. He was staring at something on the screen, his jaw tight. "Vanessa," he said quietly, "come look at this." She moved to stand behind him, looking over his shoulder at Section 12 of the contract. "Read subsection 14, Clause 9, Ethan said. Then read Section 8, subsection 3, Clause 16. Then go to Section 19, subsection 7. Vanessa read the sections he indicated, not understanding what she was supposed to see. "Now read them in order," Ethan continued, "but replace every reference to affiliate entity with parent corporation. Replace integration milestone with board composition trigger. Replace disclosure timeline with control transfer sequence." She read through the sections again, making the substitutions in her head. And suddenly she saw it. The trap. Hidden across 3 different sections of the contract, buried in legitimate-sounding governance language, was a carefully constructed sequence that would transfer majority control of Sterling Capital to Garrison's parent company approximately 18 months after the merger closed. Not immediately. That would have been too obvious. But slowly, through a series of automatic triggers tied to integration milestones that sounded reasonable but were actually designed to shift power incrementally until Sterling was no longer Sterling at all. Vanessa felt like she couldn't breathe. "How did you see that?" Thomas asked, his voice shaking slightly. "Because I helped write similar structures before I quit," Ethan said flatly. "This is what happens when smart lawyers are asked to design corporate ambushes instead of honest deals." Vanessa sank into a chair. "If I sign this, I lose everything." "Not immediately. You'll have about 15 months before you realize what's happening. Then another 3 months of watching control slip away while you try to figure out how to stop it. By month 18, someone else owns your company." The room was silent except for the sound of traffic 43 floors below. Thomas spoke carefully. "We could try to renegotiate, point out these provisions, demand they be removed." "They'll agree," Ethan said, "and then they'll revise the contract with the same trap hidden differently, or they'll walk away and find another target. Either way, Garrison's parent company, whoever that is, designed this specifically to acquire Sterling without looking like a hostile takeover." "Then what do we do?" Vanessa asked. Ethan closed the laptop. "You walk away. Today. Right now. Cancel the signing, terminate negotiations, and don't look back. The investors will be pissed for about 6 months. Then they'll move on. But if you sign this deal, you'll spend the rest of your career explaining how you gave away a 60-year-old company because you didn't read your own contract carefully enough." Vanessa looked at Thomas. Her chief counsel nodded slowly. "He's right. We have to kill this deal." She pulled out her phone and stared at it, thinking about all the people waiting for her decision, the investors, the employees, the press, her father. Then she dialed David Garrison's number. He answered on the second ring, his voice cheerful. "Vanessa, please tell me you're not calling to push back the signing time." "I'm calling to cancel it entirely." Silence. I'm sorry, what? The deal is off, David. We've found provisions in the contract that we can't accept. What provisions? Vanessa, we've been over every page of this agreement. If there's a concern, we can address it before signing. No, we're done. I'm terminating negotiations effective immediately. She could hear him breathing on the other end of the line, the cheerfulness gone completely. Do you have any idea what you're doing? David's voice was cold now. How this will look? The damage to both our companies' reputations? I'm protecting my company. That's what I'm doing. By backing out of a done deal at the last minute based on some paranoid reading of standard governance language? Vanessa, this is corporate suicide. Then I guess I'm suicidal. Goodbye, David. She hung up before he could respond. For a moment, nobody moved. Then Thomas let out a long breath. I'll start notifying the stakeholders. Tell them the truth, Vanessa said. We found problems in the contract that couldn't be resolved. Thomas nodded and left the conference room. Vanessa sat there with Ethan Calloway, the man she'd humiliated that morning, who just saved her from destroying everything her father had built. Thank you, she said quietly. Ethan stood up. Don't thank me. Just learn from it. What do you mean? He looked at her with those sharp, evaluating eyes. You almost lost your company today because you were so focused on winning that you stopped paying attention to what you were actually signing. That's not a contract problem. That's a judgment problem. Vanessa felt anger flare, ready to defend herself. But the words died before she could speak them. Because he was right. She'd been so determined to close the deal, to prove she belonged in the CEO chair, to show her father and the investors and every doubter that she could execute at the highest level. She'd stopped asking whether the deal itself made sense. How do I fix that? She asked. Stop measuring success by how impressive something looks, and start measuring it by whether it's actually good for your company. Ethan picked up his jacket from the back of the chair. Also, stop towing people's trucks without asking questions first. Despite everything, Vanessa almost smiled. Ethan headed for the door, then paused. For what it's worth, having the courage to walk away from a bad deal takes more strength than closing it would have. Most CEOs can't do that. You're saying I did something right? I'm saying you're learning. That's better than being right. He left. Vanessa sat alone in the conference room as the afternoon light slanted through the windows, painting Chicago gold below her. Somewhere in the building, Thomas was making phone calls that would shatter months of work. Somewhere across the city, David Garrison was probably planning how to spin this disaster. And somewhere in her father's office, Robert Sterling was likely composing a message about disappointment and missed opportunities. But Vanessa felt something she hadn't felt in months. Relief. She'd almost driven off a cliff today, and the only reason she hadn't was because a man in a faded work jacket, a man she'd judged worthless based on his truck, had cared enough to catch her. Her phone started buzzing with incoming calls. The investors, the board members, the press. She let it buzz. For the first time in her career, Vanessa Sterling had more important things to think about than what everyone else thought of her decisions. She had to figure out who she actually wanted to be. The calls didn't stop. By 5 p.m., Vanessa had fielded 17 conversations with investors, each one progressively more hostile than the last. Richard Hallstrom had been blunt. You just cost us 6 months of positioning and millions in expected returns. Peter Yates from Pembroke had been worse. I hope you have a damn good explanation for the board, because right now you look like an amateur who got cold feet. She'd given them the same answer each time. Problems in the contract structure, irreconcilable governance issues, protecting shareholder interests, corporate language that meant nothing and everything. None of them had asked for details. They didn't care about the mechanics of what went wrong. They cared about the headline. Young CEO kills billion-dollar deal hours before signing. By 6 p.m., the financial press had picked up the story. Bloomberg ran it first, followed by Reuters, then the Wall Street Journal. The articles were careful, citing unnamed sources and industry insiders, but the narrative was already forming. Vanessa Sterling, 30 years old and in over her head, had panicked and torpedoed her own company's biggest opportunity. Her father called at 6:47 p.m. Vanessa stared at his name on her screen for 3 rings before answering. Dad? My office. Now. The line went dead. Robert Sterling's office occupied the northeast corner of the 44th floor, 1 level above Vanessa's. He'd officially retired as CEO 14 months ago, but everyone knew he still controlled the important decisions. The board consulted him. The senior partners deferred to him. And Vanessa reported to him, whether the organizational chart said so or not. She took the stairs instead of the elevator, using the extra minute to prepare herself for whatever was coming. His assistant waved her through without a word. Inside, Robert sat behind his desk, the same massive oak desk he'd used for 30 years, reading something on his tablet. He didn't look up when she entered. "Close the door." Vanessa closed it and stood there, waiting. Robert finished reading, set the tablet down, and finally looked at his daughter. He was 63, gray-haired, built like a man who'd worked construction before he'd worked finance. His expression gave away nothing. "Explain," he said. The merger contract contained hidden provisions that would have transferred control of Sterling to Garrison's parent company within 18 months. If I'd signed it, we would have lost everything. According to who? According to an independent review of the governance structure. Thomas signed off on that contract. So did 6 other lawyers. You're telling me they all missed something? Yes. Robert leaned back in his chair. And you discovered this problem how many hours before the signing? 2. 2 hours. He said it like he was tasting something bitter. And in those 2 hours, you decided to blow up 6 months of negotiations, embarrass our investors, and make this company look incompetent to every outlet from here to New York. I decided to protect the company you built. By making us look weak? By proving to everyone watching that my daughter doesn't have the spine to close a deal when it matters? Vanessa felt heat rising in her chest. You'd rather I signed a contract that gave away the company just to avoid bad press? I'd rather you had figured this out before the morning of the signing. Robert's voice rose for the first time. Do you have any idea what you've done to our reputation, to our relationships with the investment community? Garrison is already threatening legal action. We're going to spend the next year cleaning up this mess. Better than spending it watching someone else take control of Sterling. Except you can't prove that's what would have happened. You're basing this entire decision on some interpretation of contract language that 7 lawyers didn't flag as a problem. Because I brought in someone who understood what to look for. Robert's eyes narrowed. Who? Vanessa hesitated. An outside consultant, former M&A specialist. Name: Ethan Calloway. Her father's expression changed. Not much, but enough. Ethan Calloway looked at our contract? You know him? Robert stood up and walked to the window, his back to Vanessa. For a long moment, he didn't speak. I know of him, he finally said. He left the industry about 5 years ago. Rumor was his wife died and he couldn't handle the pressure anymore. Just disappeared. He turned back to face her. And you trusted our entire merger decision to someone who walked away from finance because he couldn't cope? I trusted someone who found a trap that nobody else saw. Or maybe he saw problems that don't exist. Maybe he's so damaged from whatever happened to him that he's paranoid about corporate structures that are perfectly normal. Vanessa shook her head. He showed me exactly how the provisions work together. It wasn't paranoia, it was mathematics. Then show me, right now. Prove to me that walking away was the right call. She pulled out her phone and forwarded him the notes Ethan had compiled, the section cross-references, the substitution analysis, the timeline of control transfer. Robert read through them in silence, his jaw working. When he finished, he set the phone down carefully. This could be legitimate, he admitted, or it could be an overinterpretation of standard language. Without seeing how Garrison actually intended to implement these provisions, we're guessing. We're protecting ourselves. We're running scared. Robert's voice was hard again. And in this business, scared money never wins. You should have negotiated, demanded changes, backed them into a corner until they either fixed the problems or walked away themselves. Instead, you pulled the plug and made us look like we don't know what we're doing. I made a judgment call with the information I had. No, Vanessa, you panicked. The word hit like a slap. I did not panic. Then what do you call killing a deal 2 hours before signing because some mechanic who quit the industry told you to be afraid? I call it listening to someone who knew more than our own legal team. You call it doubt. And the second our competitors smell doubt on you, they'll tear you apart. Robert moved closer, his voice dropping. I gave you this position because I thought you were ready, because I believed you had the strength to make hard choices and live with them. But the first time things got complicated, you folded. Vanessa felt something crack inside her chest. I saved the company. You saved yourself from having to be responsible if something went wrong. There's a difference. She stood there staring at her father, understanding for the first time that nothing she did would ever be enough. She could close 100 deals or kill 100 deals, and he would always find the flaw, always find the weakness. I'm done explaining myself to you, she said quietly. Robert raised an eyebrow. Excuse me? You heard me? I made the call I thought was right. If the board disagrees, they can replace me. But I'm not going to stand here and let you tell me I'm weak because I chose caution over ego. Caution? You think this was caution? Yes. And if you can't see that, then maybe you've been in this business too long to remember what integrity looks like. The silence that followed was absolute. Robert's expression went cold. Get out of my office. Vanessa turned and walked out, her hands shaking, her heart hammering. She made it to the stairwell before the adrenaline wore off and the reality of what she'd just done hit her. She'd essentially told her father to go to hell, the man who'd given her this job, who controlled the board, who could end her career with 3 phone calls. She sat down on the stairs and put her head in her hands. Her phone buzzed. A text from Michelle. Press is asking for a statement. What should I tell them? Vanessa didn't know. She didn't know anything anymore. Another text, this one from Thomas. Board wants an emergency meeting tomorrow morning at 8. They're bringing in outside counsel to review the contract. Good. Let them review it. Let them see exactly what she'd seen, or let them prove her wrong. Either way, at least someone else would carry the weight of this decision. She sat on the stairs for 20 minutes, listening to the building empty out around her. Footsteps in hallways. Elevator doors opening and closing. The sound of a company moving on while she sat frozen. Finally, she stood up and headed down to the parking garage. The drive home took 40 minutes through rush hour traffic. Vanessa lived in a downtown condo that cost more than most people's houses, all glass and steel and expensive furniture that looked beautiful and felt empty. She'd bought it because that's what successful executives did, because appearances mattered. Tonight, she hated every inch of it. She poured herself a glass of wine she didn't want and stood at her window looking out over the city. 43 floors up in the office, 22 floors up at home. Always elevated, always separate, always alone. Her phone rang. An unknown number. She almost didn't answer, but something made her pick up. Vanessa Sterling. It's Ethan Calloway. She straightened. How did you get this number? Thomas gave it to me. Hope that's okay. It's fine. What do you need? A pause. Actually, I was calling to see if you need anything. I've been watching the news. Looks like you're taking some heat. Vanessa laughed, but it came out bitter. That's an understatement. Half the financial world thinks I'm incompetent, and the other half thinks I'm crazy. What do you think? The question caught her off guard. I think I made the right call, but I'm starting to wonder if making the right call even matters. It matters. Does it? Because from where I'm standing, all I've done is prove to everyone that I'm not ready for this job. Ethan was quiet for a moment. Can I ask you something? Sure. Why did you become a CEO? Vanessa frowned. What kind of question is that? A real one. Why did you want this position? She opened her mouth to give the standard answer. Passion for finance, commitment to excellence, desire to lead. But talking to Ethan felt different somehow, like he'd see through corporate bullshit before she finished speaking it. My father built this company, she said finally, and I spent my whole life watching him be respected, feared, successful. I wanted that. I wanted to prove I could do what he did. To him or to yourself? I don't know anymore. That's honest, at least. Vanessa took a sip of wine. Can I ask you something now? Fair trade. Why did you leave finance? The silence stretched long enough that she thought he might have hung up. Then his voice came back, quieter than before. My wife died 4 years ago. Car accident. 1 minute she was driving to pick up our daughter from school. The next minute, I was getting a call from the hospital. He paused. After that, nothing in the corporate world made sense anymore. All these brilliant people fighting over money and power and market share, and none of it mattered. None of it was real. So I quit. I'm sorry. Don't be. I'm not. Leaving was the best decision I ever made. Then why did you help me today? Another pause. Because I remember what it feels like to be trapped in a world that measures your worth in deals closed and dollars earned. And I didn't want to watch someone else get destroyed by that system if I could prevent it. Vanessa felt something loosen in her chest. Thank you for that, for all of it. You're welcome. Now get some sleep. Tomorrow's going to be worse than today. That's encouraging. I didn't say it would be easy. I said it would be worth it. He hung up before she could respond. Vanessa stood there holding her phone, feeling slightly less alone than she had 5 minutes ago. She finished her wine, took a shower, and tried to sleep. She failed. At 3 a.m., she gave up and opened her laptop. Started reading through the coverage of the collapsed merger. Most of it was speculation, but a few articles had quotes from unnamed sources at Garrison Financial painting Vanessa as unstable and unprofessional. One article in particular caught her attention. A piece in Financial Chronicle that suggested Sterling Capital's legal team had failed to conduct proper due diligence, and that Vanessa's last-minute panic had exposed systemic competence issues within the firm. The byline was from a reporter named Marcus Chen, someone she'd never heard of. But the quotes sounded like they'd come from someone inside Sterling. She grabbed her phone and called Thomas, not caring that it was 3 a.m. He answered on the fourth ring, his voice thick with sleep. Vanessa, what's wrong? Someone inside our company is talking to the press, feeding them negative narratives about the merger. What? Who? I don't know, but read the Financial Chronicle piece that posted an hour ago. Those details about our legal review process didn't come from Garrison. Someone here is leaking. She heard rustling as Thomas presumably reached for his own phone. A moment of silence while he read. Then a string of creative profanity. That's definitely from someone internal, he said. Probably someone who wanted the merger to go through. Maybe someone who lost money when we pulled out. Can you find out who? I can try. But Vanessa, even if we identify the leak, what are you going to do about it? Fire someone for talking to reporters? That'll just create more negative press. I need to know who I can trust. Right now? Assume you can't trust anyone. That's the safest play. Vanessa ended the call feeling worse than before. Somewhere in her company, someone was actively working against her. Someone who wanted her to fail. Welcome to leadership. The emergency board meeting started at 8 a.m. sharp. Vanessa arrived 15 minutes early to find half the board already assembled, talking in quiet clusters that went silent when she entered. The outside counsel Thomas had mentioned was there too, a woman named Patricia Hendricks from a white shoe law firm that specialized in corporate litigation. Richard Hallstrom and Peter Yates sat together on one side of the table, both looking grim. Her father sat at the head, his expression unreadable. Vanessa took her seat and waited. At exactly 8 o'clock, the board chairman, a semi-retired investment banker named Gerald Morrison, called the meeting to order. We're here to discuss yesterday's decision to terminate the Garrison merger, he began. Vanessa, we'd like you to walk us through your reasoning. She'd prepared for this, spent the sleepless hours between 3 and 6 a.m. organizing her thoughts, building her case. She pulled up the contract analysis Ethan had provided and walked the board through every provision, every cross-reference, every subtle mechanism that would have transferred control. It took 40 minutes. When she finished, the room was silent. Patricia Hendricks spoke first. I've reviewed these provisions as well, and I have to say, this is sophisticated work. The kind of structure you'd only build if you specifically intended to create a delayed control transfer. Or, Richard Hallstrom cut in, the kind of language that looks suspicious if you're predisposed to see threats everywhere. Patricia shook her head. Mr. Hallstrom, I've been doing corporate law for 23 years. This isn't standard language. This is deliberate architecture. Based on what evidence? Garrison hasn't done anything to suggest hostile intent. We're condemning them based on theoretical possibilities. Theoretical possibilities that would have cost us the company, Vanessa said. Or theoretical possibilities that gave you an excuse to back out of a deal you were too scared to close. The accusation hung in the air. Gerald Morrison cleared his throat. Let's stay focused on the facts. Patricia, in your professional opinion, did these contract provisions represent a genuine threat to Sterling's independence? Yes. If implemented as written, control would have shifted to Garrison's parent company between months 15 and 20 post-merger. The structure is textbook acquisition disguised as partnership. And could we have negotiated changes to these provisions? Possibly, but given how deeply embedded they are across multiple sections, I suspect Garrison would have either refused or simply restructured the same mechanisms differently. This wasn't accidental language, this was intentional. Peter Yates leaned forward. So we're saying Garrison deliberately tried to trap us. I'm saying the contract was structured in a way that would benefit them significantly more than us. And that benefit was hidden well enough that most legal teams would miss it. Most legal teams did miss it, Robert Sterling said, speaking for the first time, including ours. The only reason we caught it was because Vanessa brought in an outside consultant at the last minute. Who is this consultant? Gerald asked. Ethan Calloway, Vanessa said. Former M&A specialist. He identified the problem in under 2 hours. And where is Mr. Calloway now? Can we bring him in to explain his analysis? He doesn't do corporate consulting anymore. He reviewed the contract as a personal favor. Richard Hallstrom snorted. So we killed $1 billion deal based on advice from someone who quit the industry and works as a mechanic now? That's your defense? My defense is that he was right. Vanessa's voice was sharp. Everything he said is being confirmed by independent counsel right now. The fact that he doesn't work in finance anymore doesn't make his analysis less valid. It makes his judgment questionable. People don't leave successful careers without a reason. His wife died, Vanessa said quietly. That was his reason. The room went silent. Gerald Morrison looked at Patricia. In your opinion, did Ms. Sterling make the right call? Patricia didn't hesitate. Yes. If she'd signed that contract, Sterling Capital would likely be under different ownership within 2 years. Then I move that we formally support the decision to terminate the merger, Gerald said. All in favor? 6 hands went up. 3 stayed down. Richard, Peter, and 2 other investors who'd been counting on merger returns. Motion carries, Gerald said. Vanessa, you have the board's backing. Now let's talk about next steps. The meeting continued for another hour, discussing damage control strategies, investor communications, and how to position Sterling going forward. Vanessa participated, answered questions, but part of her was still processing what had just happened. The board had backed her. Not unanimously, not enthusiastically, but they'd backed her. When the meeting finally ended, her father caught her in the hallway outside. You got lucky, he said. Excuse me? Patricia's endorsement saved you. If she'd said the contract was fine, the board would have voted differently. Vanessa looked at him steadily. But she didn't say that, because the contract wasn't fine. Robert studied her for a moment. You're learning, slowly, but you're learning. It wasn't praise, but from him, it was close enough. He walked away, leaving Vanessa standing in the hallway feeling exhausted and vindicated and still somehow empty. The rest of the week was brutal. Garrison Financial went on the offensive, giving interviews suggesting Sterling had negotiated in bad faith. Several smaller investors pulled their money, spooked by the uncertainty. The press continued picking apart Vanessa's decision, with opinion pieces ranging from supportive to scathing. But Sterling survived. And slowly, quietly, other things started happening. A reporter from Reuters did a deep dive into Garrison's corporate structure and found layers of shell companies and hidden ownership that raised serious questions. 2 other firms that had been in talks with Garrison suddenly pulled out of negotiations. Financial regulators opened a preliminary inquiry into Garrison's disclosure practices. The merger that Vanessa had killed started looking less like an opportunity and more like a bullet dodged. By Friday afternoon, the narrative had shifted. Not completely. Not everywhere. But enough that Vanessa started getting calls from analysts and investors who admitted, reluctantly, carefully, that maybe she'd made the right choice. She was in her office reviewing Q4 projections when Michelle knocked. Someone's here to see you, says he doesn't have an appointment, but you'll want to talk to him. Vanessa looked up. Who? Ethan Calloway. She felt her pulse quicken slightly. Send him in. Ethan entered wearing the same faded jeans and work jacket he'd had on the day they met. He looked around her office, taking in the expensive furniture, the floor-to-ceiling windows, the carefully curated art, and something like amusement crossed his face. Nice view, he said. Thanks for the warning about today being worse than the day before. You were right. Usually am. He walked to the window and looked out over the city. Saw the Reuters piece. Looks like Garrison's having a rough week. They deserve it. Maybe. Or maybe they're just the visible part of something bigger. He turned to face her. That parent company Patricia mentioned in the board meeting, did anyone track down who actually owns it? I have people looking into it. Why? Because Garrison Financial is small for this kind of operation. They're not sophisticated enough to build that contract structure on their own. Someone else designed it. Someone with resources and experience. Vanessa felt a chill. You think Garrison was working for someone else? I think Garrison was bait, and Sterling was the target. The question is who was fishing? Can you help me find out? Ethan shook his head. That's not my world anymore. But you know this world better than anyone I have access to. I know what this world does to people who stay in it too long, and I'm not going back. Vanessa stood up and moved closer to him. I'm not asking you to go back. I'm asking you to help me understand who tried to destroy my company. One more favor, that's all. Ethan looked at her for a long moment, and she saw something complicated in his expression, like he was fighting himself. Why does this matter so much to you? He asked. Because someone almost took everything from me, and I need to know who. Wouldn't you want to know? Yeah, he said quietly. I would. He was silent for another moment, then sighed. I'll make some calls, ask around, but I'm not making promises, and I'm not getting pulled back into this full time. That's all I'm asking. He nodded and headed for the door, then stopped. Vanessa? Yeah? You did good this week. Better than most people would have in your position. I'm still getting death threats from investors who lost money. That just means you made a real decision instead of a comfortable one. The comfortable decisions never get death threats. He left before she could respond. Vanessa stood at her window watching the city below, thinking about death threats and comfortable decisions, and the strange mechanic who kept showing up to save her when she needed it most. Her phone buzzed with another investor call. She answered it and got back to work. 3 days passed before Ethan called her back. Vanessa was in a strategy meeting with her senior team when her phone lit up with his name. She excused herself and stepped into the hallway. Tell me you found something. I found a lot of things, Ethan said. None of them good. Can you meet me somewhere that's not your office? When? Now would be better than later. Vanessa checked her watch. It was 2 in the afternoon and she had meetings stacked until 7. But something in Ethan's voice made her pause. Where? There's a diner on West Monroe, Sullivan's. You know it? I'll find it. She went back into the meeting long enough to tell Thomas he was in charge for the rest of the day, grabbed her coat, and headed out before anyone could ask questions. Sullivan's turned out to be the kind of place that looked like it hadn't been renovated since 1987. Vinyl booths, linoleum floors, a menu board with plastic letters. Vanessa felt overdressed the moment she walked in wearing her tailored suit. Ethan was in a corner booth, nursing a coffee and looking at something on his laptop. He didn't look up until she slid into the seat across from him. You want anything? He asked. Information. You said you found something. He turned the laptop toward her. On the screen was a corporate filing diagram that looked like someone had tried to map the human nervous system. That's Garrison Financial's ownership structure, Ethan said. Took me 2 days to trace it backwards through shell companies and holding corporations. You see that entity at the top? Vanessa squinted at the screen. Meridian Holdings, LLC. Right. And Meridian Holdings is owned by a private equity fund called Apex Strategic Partners. Ever heard of them? No. Most people haven't. They specialize in quiet acquisitions. They find mid-sized companies with good fundamentals, engineer takeovers that look like partnerships, then strip the valuable assets and sell off the rest. Vanessa felt ice spreading through her stomach. How many companies have they done this to? In the last 7 years? 14 that I could confirm. Probably more that I didn't find. Ethan pulled the laptop back and clicked through several more documents. The pattern is always the same. Identify a target. Approach through a front company that seems legitimate. Structure a deal that looks beneficial but contains hidden control mechanisms. Wait 18 to 24 months. Execute the transfer. By the time anyone realizes what happened, Apex owns everything and the original company is just a name on paper. Why hasn't anyone stopped them? Because they're very good at making it look legal. The contracts hold up in court. The target companies technically agree to everything. And by the time someone figures out they've been screwed, Apex has already liquidated the assets and moved on. Vanessa stared at the corporate diagram, understanding for the first time how close she'd come to losing everything. Sterling would have been number 15 Keats. Yeah, but who runs Apex? Ethan clicked to another screen. A professional headshot appeared. A man in his 50s, silver hair, expensive suit, the kind of generic corporate portrait that could have been anyone. Kenneth Vance, former investment banker, made his money in the 90s doing leveraged buyouts, disappeared from public view around 2015 and started Apex. He's ruthless, smart, and very careful about staying off the radar. How did you find all this? I still know people in the industry, people who remember when I was good at this kind of research. Ethan closed the laptop. I called in some favors, asked questions I probably shouldn't have asked, and now you know what you're dealing with. Vanessa leaned back in the booth, trying to process it all. What do I do with this information? Nothing. What? Vanessa, these people destroy companies for profit. If you go after them publicly, they'll bury you in lawsuits and negative press until you don't have a company left to protect. The smart play is to walk away and be grateful you dodged them. They tried to steal my company, and they failed. Take the win and move on. She shook her head. What about the next company they target? We just let them keep doing this? That's not your problem. It is if I can stop it. Ethan looked at her with something between frustration and respect. You can't save everyone, Vanessa. I'm not trying to save everyone. I'm trying to stop one predator from taking down more people who don't see it coming. By doing what exactly? Going to the press? The SEC? They'll lawyer up and nothing will happen except you'll make yourself a target. Then what would you do? Ethan was quiet for a long moment. I'd find someone they're about to hit and warn them. Quietly. No press. No public accusations. Just share what you know and let them make their own decisions. That way Apex doesn't know you're interfering and you're not putting yourself at risk. Vanessa considered this. Do you know who their next target is? I might have an idea. But Vanessa, this is exactly the kind of thing I left finance to avoid. These corporate wars, these games where everyone's trying to destroy everyone else, it's exhausting and it never ends. I'm not asking you to fight my battles. I'm asking you to help me do one decent thing before we both walk away. He studied her across the table, and she could see him weighing something internal. Finally, he sighed. There's a company in Minneapolis, regional manufacturing firm called Hendrix Industrial. Good fundamentals, steady growth, privately held by a family that's been running it for 3 generations. Word is Apex has been circling them for months. How do you know this? Because the same consulting firm that worked on your Garrison deal just took on Hendrix as a client, and I recognize the partner who's running point. He's done this before for Apex fronts. Vanessa pulled out her phone. What's the name of the owner? James Hendrix. But Vanessa, think about what you're doing. If you contact him, you're potentially exposing yourself to, I'm thinking about what happens if I don't contact him. Give me his information. Ethan shook his head but pulled up the details on his laptop. Vanessa copied them into her phone, already composing the message in her head. This is a mistake, Ethan said. Probably, but it's my mistake to make. She stood up to leave, then hesitated. Why are you helping me with this? You said you wanted nothing to do with corporate finance anymore. Ethan looked down at his coffee. Because watching you almost get destroyed reminded me why I got into this business in the first place, before it became about money and power, back when it was supposed to be about building things that mattered. He met her eyes. You're trying to do something right in an industry that doesn't reward that. It's stupid and probably hopeless, but it's better than just accepting that this is how things work. So you're saying I'm an idiot, but you respect it? Something like that? Vanessa almost smiled. Thanks, Ethan, for all of this. Don't thank me yet. You haven't seen how badly this could go wrong. She left the diner and headed back to her car, already pulling up James Hendrix's contact information. She composed an email carefully, keeping it vague enough to avoid legal exposure but specific enough to raise red flags. Mr. Hendrix, you don't know me, but I recently terminated a business relationship that involved some of the same parties you're currently working with. I'd like to share some concerns about contract structures that may not be in your company's best interest. If you're willing to speak confidentially, I can be reached at this email or by phone. She hit send before she could second-guess herself. The response came 6 hours later, just as Vanessa was leaving the office for the night. A brief message. I'm interested. Can you talk tomorrow? They set up a call for the following afternoon. Vanessa spent the morning preparing, pulling together all the documentation Ethan had provided, organizing the contract analysis into something a non-lawyer could understand. At 2 p.m., her phone rang. Mr. Hendricks, this is Vanessa Sterling. Ms. Sterling, I appreciate you reaching out. I have to admit, your email has me concerned. His voice was older, careful. She pictured a man in his 60s, someone who'd spent his life building something real. I understand. Let me explain the situation as directly as I can. She walked him through the Garrison merger, the hidden contract provisions, the connection to Apex strategic partners. She didn't sugarcoat anything or make claims she couldn't back up. When she finished, there was a long silence. You're telling me this consulting firm that's been helping us structure a partnership deal is actually working for a fund that strips companies for parts? I'm telling you the patterns are similar enough that you should have independent counsel review any contracts before you sign them, specifically looking for provisions around affiliate disclosure, board composition, and integration timelines. We've already signed preliminary agreements. Vanessa's stomach dropped. How preliminary? Letter of intent. Non-binding, but it outlines the basic structure. We're supposed to finalize the full contract next month. Then you still have time. Get someone who specializes in hostile takeover defense to review everything. Look for the same mechanisms I found in my deal. And if we find them, walk away. No matter how good the deal looks, if those provisions are there, you're signing away your company. Another long silence. Then, why are you doing this? What do you get out of warning me? Vanessa looked out her office window at the Chicago skyline. Nothing. I just don't want to watch someone else lose what I almost lost. That's not how this business usually works. I know. She could hear him breathing on the other end, weighing his options. I'll have our lawyers look at everything again. And Miss Sterling, thank you. Whether this turns out to be something or nothing, I appreciate the warning. You're welcome. And Mr. Hendricks, be careful who you trust. These people are very good at looking legitimate. The call ended. Vanessa sat at her desk feeling simultaneously relieved and terrified. She'd just inserted herself into someone else's business deal based on patterns and suspicions. If she was wrong, she'd look paranoid and reckless. If she was right, she'd potentially saved a company but also made an enemy of people who didn't lose gracefully. Her phone buzzed. A text from Ethan. Did you contact Hendricks? Yes. He's going to review his contracts. You know this makes you a target, right? I know. And you did it anyway. Yes. Stupid but brave. I'll give you that. She smiled despite herself. The next week moved fast. Vanessa buried herself in running Sterling, trying to rebuild investor confidence and push forward on projects that had been delayed during the merger chaos. But part of her attention was always on Minneapolis, waiting to hear whether Hendricks Industrial would find what she thought they'd find. The call came on Thursday afternoon. Miss Sterling, this is James Hendricks. We reviewed our preliminary agreements with the outside counsel you recommended. Vanessa's pulse quickened. And? You were right. The provisions were there, buried across multiple sections, just like you described. If we'd signed the final contract, we would have lost majority control within 2 years. What are you going to do? We've terminated all negotiations, sent a formal withdrawal letter this morning. Our lawyers are already getting calls threatening litigation, but we're standing firm. Vanessa felt a wave of relief so strong it was almost physical. I'm glad you found it in time. We wouldn't have if you hadn't reached out. You saved my company, Ms. Sterling. My family's legacy. I don't know how to thank you for that. You don't have to thank me. Just be careful going forward. And if you hear about other companies being approached with similar deals, maybe pass along the warning. I will. And Ms. Sterling, if you ever need anything from Hendricks Industrial, you call me directly. After they hung up, Vanessa sat very still, processing what had just happened. She'd actually done it, warned someone, saved them, made a difference. Her moment of satisfaction lasted approximately 2 hours. That's when Michelle appeared in her doorway looking worried. Ms. Sterling? There are 2 men in the lobby asking to see you. They say they're from Apex Strategic Partners. The bottom dropped out of Vanessa's stomach. Did they say what they want? No, but they're insisting it's urgent. Vanessa stood up, her heart hammering. This was it. The confrontation she'd known was coming but hoped to avoid. Send them to conference room C. I'll be there in 5 minutes. She used those 5 minutes to call Ethan. He answered on the first ring. What's wrong? Apex is here, in my building, asking to meet with me. Don't meet with them alone. Get Thomas or another witness in there, and don't admit to anything. What am I supposed to say? As little as possible. Listen to what they want, don't make commitments, and get them out as fast as you can. Ethan, I'm scared. Good. Scared people are careful. Just remember, they're here because you cost them something. That means you won. Don't let them take that away from you. She ended the call and grabbed Thomas from his office. Together they walked to conference room C. The two men waiting inside looked exactly like what they were. Expensive lawyers dressed in suits that cost more than most people's monthly salaries. One was in his 40s, sharp-featured, with the kind of cold eyes that suggested he enjoyed his work. The other was older, silver-haired, wearing a smile that didn't reach anywhere near his face. The older one stood up and extended his hand. Ms. Sterling, Kenneth Vance. Thank you for seeing us. Vanessa recognized the name from Ethan's research, the man who ran Apex. She shook his hand because refusing would have been too obvious, but she felt like she was touching something contaminated. Mr. Vance, this is Thomas Renwick, my chief counsel. What can I do for you? We wanted to discuss some recent business developments that concern both our organizations. I'm not aware of any connection between Sterling Capital and Apex Strategic Partners. No? That's interesting, because we've become aware that you've been making inquiries about our corporate structure, sharing information about our business practices with third parties. That kind of interference could be considered actionable. Vanessa kept her expression neutral. I don't know what you're talking about. Don't you? The younger lawyer spoke for the first time, his voice sharp. You contacted James Hendricks, told him not to work with our consulting partners, cost us a very lucrative deal. That's tortious interference, Ms. Sterling. I had a conversation with a business associate about contract review best practices. That's not interference. That's professional courtesy. Professional courtesy that conveniently torpedoed our acquisition timeline. Kenneth's smile never wavered. Let's not play games. You know what we do. We know you interfered. The question is what happens next. Thomas cleared his throat. If you're threatening legal action, I'd suggest you file your complaint and let the court sort it out. Otherwise, this meeting is over. I'm not threatening legal action, Kenneth said smoothly. I'm offering a professional understanding. You stay out of our business, we stay out of yours. No lawsuits, no press coverage about Sterling's recent judgment failures, no questions about how thoroughly you vet your own deals. Vanessa felt anger cutting through her fear. You're trying to intimidate me into silence. I'm trying to prevent an unnecessary conflict. You're young, Ms. Sterling, talented, from what I hear, but inexperienced in how these things work. There are players in this industry who are much bigger and much more patient than you can imagine. Fighting them doesn't make you brave. It makes you a target. Is that a threat? It's advice from someone who's been doing this a lot longer than you have. Kenneth stood up, buttoning his suit jacket. Think about it. Sterling Capital is doing well right now. You've got momentum, good press, a future. Don't throw that away on some misguided crusade to save companies that can't save themselves. He walked to the door, then paused. One more thing. That consultant you've been working with, Ethan Calloway. He left this business for a reason. Multiple reasons, actually. You might want to ask him about the Melbourne deal before you trust his judgment too completely. The two men left. Vanessa and Thomas sat in silence for a long moment. What the hell was that about? Thomas finally asked. That was them letting me know they're watching, and that they can hurt me if I keep interfering. Are you going to stop? Vanessa thought about James Hendricks and his family's company, about the 14 other companies Apex had already destroyed, about Kenneth Vance's cold smile and the casual way he'd threatened her entire career. No, she said. I'm not going to stop. Thomas looked at her like she'd lost her mind. Vanessa, these people are serious. If they come after Sterling, let them come. I'm not going to let fear turn me into someone who watches bad things happen and does nothing. She left the conference room and went straight to her office, closing the door behind her. Her hands were shaking, adrenaline and anger mixing in her bloodstream. She called Ethan. They threatened me, she said when he answered. Vance himself. Came to my office and basically told me to shut up or they'd destroy my company. What did you say? I didn't say anything. Thomas handled most of it. But Ethan, Vance mentioned you specifically. Said something about a Melbourne deal. What was he talking about? The silence on the other end stretched long enough to make her nervous. Ethan? That was a long time ago. What happened? I made a mistake. A big one. Cost people money and careers. It's why I left the industry. Tell me. Another pause? Then, not over the phone. If you want to know, come to the shop tonight, 7 o'clock. He hung up before she could respond. Vanessa spent the rest of the afternoon distracted, going through the motions of meetings and calls while her mind churned. What had Ethan done that was bad enough to make him quit finance entirely? And why had Kenneth Vance brought it up now? At 6:45, she left the office and drove across the river to Callaway's Auto. The shop was closed, but lights were on in the back bay. She knocked on the side door until Ethan appeared and let her in. He looked tired. More than tired. Worn down, like the conversation she was forcing him to have was costing him something important. You want coffee? He asked. I want the truth about Melbourne. Ethan grabbed 2 beers from a small refrigerator in the corner instead. He handed her one and sat down on a workbench. 7 years ago, I was working on a deal in Australia. Tech company merger worth about $300 million. I did the due diligence, reviewed the contracts, told my clients it was clean. They signed. He took a long drink from his beer. 6 months later, the whole thing collapsed. Turned out there were accounting irregularities I'd missed. The target company had been inflating their revenue numbers for years. When it came out, both companies tanked. My clients lost everything. People lost their jobs. Some lost their retirement savings. Vanessa felt her chest tighten. That wasn't your fault. You couldn't have known about fraud that's sophisticated. I should have known. That's what they paid me for, to know. To catch things other people missed. And I didn't catch it because I was moving too fast, taking on too many clients, too focused on closing deals and making money to do the actual work right. What happened after? Lawsuits, lots of them. Most got settled, but the damage was done. My reputation was shot. And worse than that, I'd failed people who trusted me. People who believed I'd protect them. He set down the beer and looked at her directly. That's when my wife died. 3 months after the Melbourne disaster. I was already falling apart from the guilt, and then Sarah was just gone. After that, I couldn't do it anymore. Couldn't sit in boardrooms pretending that deals and money and corporate strategy mattered when everything real in my life was destroyed. So I quit, walked away from all of it. Vanessa understood now why he'd been so resistant to helping her, why he'd tried so hard to stay away from corporate finance. I'm sorry, she said, for what happened, for making you dig all this up again. You didn't make me do anything. I chose to help you, just like I chose to help Hendricks. Ethan stood up and walked to the bay doors, looking out at the dark street. But Vanessa, you need to understand something. Kenneth Vance brought up Melbourne because he's showing you what he knows. He's telling you that if you keep fighting him, he'll dig up every mistake you've ever made, every questionable decision, every vulnerability, and he'll use it to destroy you. I know. And you're going to keep going anyway. Yes. Ethan turned to look at her. Why? What's worth risking everything you've built? Because if I stop now, if I let fear make me back down, then Vance wins. And the next company he targets, and the next one after that, they all lose because I was too scared to do the right thing. The right thing gets you killed in this industry. Maybe. But doing nothing makes me someone I don't want to be. They stood there at the quiet shop, both of them understanding that they'd crossed some kind of line they couldn't uncross. Vanessa had chosen her path. And somehow, whether he wanted to admit it or not, Ethan had chosen to walk it with her. If we're going to do this, he said finally, we need to be smarter about it. No more direct warnings to apex targets, no more traceable contacts. We find people quietly, share information through intermediaries, stay invisible. We? You're going to get yourself killed if someone doesn't watch your back. Might as well be me. Vanessa felt something warm spreading in her chest. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. This is going to get worse before it gets better. I know. And there's a good chance we both lose everything. I know that too. Ethan grabbed his jacket from a hook on the wall. Then let's at least have dinner before we throw our lives away. There's a Thai place down the street that's better than it has any right to be. They walked out into the cold Chicago night. Two people who'd both been broken by the same industry, now trying to fix something that probably couldn't be fixed. But at least they weren't doing it alone. The Thai place was called Siam Corner, wedged between a laundromat and a bodega in a neighborhood where Vanessa's Mercedes drew stares. Inside it was small and warm, with mismatched chairs and the kind of worn comfort that came from 20 years of serving the same customers. They sat in a corner booth. Ethan ordered without looking at the menu, and Vanessa followed his lead, too tired to make decisions about food. "How often do you eat here?" she asked. 3-4 times a week. The owner's daughter goes to school with mine. They do homework together sometimes. He paused. "That's how I know the pad thai is safe for white people who think they can handle spicy." Vanessa smiled despite the tension still coiled in her chest. "I can handle spicy." "Everyone says that." Then they cry into their napkins. The food came fast, steaming plates of noodles and curry that smelled incredible. Vanessa realized she hadn't eaten anything since breakfast. They ate in silence for a few minutes. Then Ethan spoke without looking up from his plate. "You're going to need to change how you operate at Sterling." "What do you mean?" "If Apex is watching you, they're looking for vulnerabilities, ways to pressure you, leverage you, force you to back down. That means your company needs to be airtight. No questionable deals, no exploitable relationships, nothing they can use against you." Vanessa set down her fork. "Sterling is clean. Every company has something. Vendors who aren't quite compliant, tax strategies that push boundaries, partnerships that look bad under scrutiny. You need to audit everything before Apex's lawyers do it for you." "That'll take months." "Then you'd better start tomorrow." Ethan finally looked at her. "This isn't a game anymore, Vanessa. You picked a fight with people who destroy companies professionally. They will dig through every filing, every contract, every decision you've made since you became CEO. And when they find something, because they will find something, they'll use it to bury you. So what do I do?" "Get ahead of it. Find your own problems before they do. Fix what you can, disclose what you can't, and prepare for the fact that they're going to attack anyway." Vanessa felt the weight of it settling on her shoulders. "This is insane. I'm fighting a war I didn't start just because I warned one person not to sign a bad contract. No, you're fighting a war because you decided that doing nothing was worse than the risk of doing something. That was a choice. Own it." The words stung because they were true. She had made a choice. Standing in that conference room with Kenneth Vance, she could have agreed to stay silent, could have taken the easy path. But she hadn't. "Tell me about your daughter," Vanessa said, changing the subject before the weight crushed her completely. Ethan's expression softened slightly. "Maya, she's 8. Smart as hell, terrible at following directions, loves science and hates math even though they're basically the same thing." "She lives with you?" "Yeah, has since Sarah died. It's just the two of us." "That must be hard." "It's everything." He pushed curry around his plate. "Being her dad is the only thing that made sense after I lost Sarah. Everything else felt hollow. The money, the deals, the corporate ladder, none of it mattered compared to making sure Maya was okay." "Is she?" "Okay, I mean." "Most days. Some days she cries because she misses her mom, and there's nothing I can do except hold her until she stops. But she's resilient. Kids are better at surviving than adults." Vanessa thought about her own childhood, about her father's constant pressure and her mother's quiet absence. "What does she think you do for work?" "I fix cars," which is true. She doesn't need to know about the corporate consulting I swore I'd never do again. He smiled slightly. "Although lately she's been asking why I'm on the phone so much. Kid's perceptive." "You should tell her the truth." "Which truth? That her dad is helping someone fight a financial war that could blow up in both their faces?" "That sounds age-appropriate." "That her dad is trying to help people. That's age-appropriate." Ethan looked at her for a long moment. "You're different than I expected." "Different how?" "When I saw you that first morning, ordering my truck towed without asking a single question, I thought you were just another entitled executive who'd forgotten what real life looks like. But you're not that." "What am I?" "Stubborn, idealistic, probably going to get hurt because you can't let things go." He paused. but also brave in a way most people in your position aren't. That counts for something. Vanessa felt heat rising in her face. Is that a compliment? It's an observation. Don't let it go to your head. They finished eating and walked back to where Vanessa had parked. The street was quiet, lit by sodium lamps that turned everything orange. She unlocked her car but didn't get in. Ethan, thank you. For tonight. For all of it. Don't thank me until this is over. We might both regret it. I know, but still, thank you. She drove home through empty streets, her mind already spinning through what needed to happen next. Audit the company, shore up vulnerabilities, prepare for Apex's attack. The apartment felt more empty than usual when she walked in. She poured a glass of wine, opened her laptop, and started making lists. By midnight, she had 17 pages of notes about potential exposure points at Sterling. By 2 a.m., she'd drafted an email to Thomas outlining a comprehensive compliance review. By 3, she gave up on sleep entirely and took a shower, letting hot water wash away the exhaustion she couldn't afford to feel. At 7 a.m., she was back in the office. Thomas appeared in her doorway at 7:45, holding the email she'd sent him at 2:17 a.m. Did you sleep at all last night? No, read the email. He scanned it again, his frown deepening. You want to audit every vendor relationship, review every partnership agreement, and bring in outside counsel to examine our tax strategies? Vanessa, that's going to cost a fortune and tie up half our staff for months. I know. Why? Because Apex threatened us? We can't let fear drive. This isn't about fear. It's about being prepared. If they come after Sterling, I want to know exactly where we're vulnerable before they do. Thomas sat down heavily in the chair across from her desk. What happened yesterday? After Vance left? Vanessa told him about the conversation with Ethan, about Melbourne and the decision to keep fighting despite the risks. Thomas listened without interrupting, his expression growing more concerned with each detail. You're serious about this, he said when she finished. Going to war with a private equity fund that specializes in destroying companies. I'm serious about protecting people they're trying to destroy. If that means war, then yes. And you trust Ethan Callaway? A guy who failed spectacularly on his last major deal and then quit the industry? I trust that he understands how these people operate, and I trust that he's trying to help. Based on what? 2 weeks of knowing him? Vanessa didn't have a good answer for that. She barely knew Ethan, but something about the way he'd walked away from everything, the way he'd chosen his daughter over corporate success, the way he'd helped her despite having every reason not to. It felt real in a way most of her professional relationships didn't. Just start the audit, she said. Please. Thomas left shaking his head. The next 3 weeks were brutal. The compliance audit uncovered exactly what Ethan had predicted. Nothing illegal, but plenty of relationships and decisions that could be twisted to look questionable under hostile scrutiny. A vendor in Texas whose environmental practices were marginal at best. A partnership agreement with vague language around profit sharing. Tax strategies that were aggressive, but technically legal. Vanessa spent 18-hour days fixing problems, renegotiating contracts, building defenses. She barely saw daylight, barely slept, existed on coffee and adrenaline and the growing certainty that she was racing against a clock she couldn't see. Ethan called her every few days with updates. He'd identified 2 more companies that Apex was circling, a logistics firm in Denver and a food distributor in Atlanta. They worked out careful approaches using intermediaries and anonymous tips to share information without creating traceable connections back to Vanessa. It was exhausting and terrifying and weirdly satisfying. Then, on a Tuesday morning 3 weeks after Kenneth Vance's visit, everything exploded. Vanessa was in a meeting with her marketing team when Michelle burst in without knocking. Ms. Sterling, you need to see this, now. The panic in her voice made everyone in the room go quiet. Vanessa followed Michelle back to her office, where her assistant had pulled up a news article on the screen. The headline hit like a physical blow. Sterling Capital, under investigation for securities violations. The article, published by Financial Chronicle, the same outlet that had leaked negative information about the failed merger, cited anonymous sources claiming that the SEC had opened an investigation into Sterling's disclosure practices related to several recent deals. Vanessa's hands went cold. This isn't true. We haven't been contacted by the SEC about anything. Michelle scrolled down. The article included quotes from industry insiders suggesting that Sterling had misrepresented financial positions to investors, that the canceled Garrison merger had been a cover-up for deeper problems, and that Vanessa herself was facing potential legal consequences. None of it was true. But it didn't matter. Her phone started ringing immediately. Investors, board members, reporters, all demanding answers to accusations that had materialized out of nowhere. Thomas appeared in her doorway. "I just got off the phone with the SEC. They have no open investigation into Sterling. This article is complete fiction." "Then where did it come from?" "Three guesses and the first two don't count. Apex is making their move." Vanessa felt rage cutting through her shock. "They planted a fake story to damage our reputation. And it's working. I have already had 5 investor calls demanding emergency board meetings. The stock's down 8% since the article posted. Can we sue for defamation?" "We can try, but by the time we prove it's false and get a retraction, the damage will be done. That's the point." Vanessa grabbed her phone and called Ethan. He answered immediately. "I saw the article. How do I fight this?" "You don't fight it directly. They want you to waste time and resources on lawsuits while they keep attacking. Instead, you go on offense." "How?" "By exposing what they're doing, not just to you, to everyone. You make Apex's entire business model public knowledge. Show the pattern of how they operate. Make them the story instead of you." "That'll take time we don't have." "Then we'd better work fast." Vanessa ended the call and looked at Thomas. "Cancel everything on my schedule for the next 48 hours and get me every piece of research we have on Apex Strategic Partners." "Vanessa, what are you planning?" "I'm planning to burn their house down before they burn mine." The next 2 days were a blur of research, fact-checking, and strategic planning. Ethan brought over everything he'd compiled on Apex: the ownership structures, the pattern of acquisitions, the shell companies, and hidden mechanisms. Vanessa added financial analysis, documented evidence of other companies they'd destroyed, testimony from executives who'd lost everything to Apex's schemes. They built a case. Not a legal case. Something better. A narrative. A story about corporate predators who hid behind legitimate business practices while systematically stripping assets from unsuspecting companies. On Thursday afternoon, Vanessa called a press conference. The financial media showed up expecting her to address the fake SEC investigation. Instead, she stood at a podium in Sterling's main conference room and detonated a bomb. 3 weeks ago, I was approached by representatives of a private equity fund called Apex Strategic Partners. They threatened me because I'd interfered with their acquisition plans by warning another CEO about predatory contract provisions. She paused, looking directly into the cameras. "Today, I'm going to show you exactly how Apex operates and why they wanted me to stay silent." She spent 40 minutes walking through the evidence, named companies Apex had destroyed, showed the contract mechanisms they used, connected the dots between shell corporations and hidden ownership structures. She didn't mention the fake SEC story, didn't defend herself against false accusations, just methodically exposed Apex's entire operation to public scrutiny. The room was dead silent by the time she finished. "I know this makes me a target," Vanessa said. "I know Apex will retaliate, but I'd rather fight them in public than watch them quietly destroy more companies while everyone pretends not to notice. If you're a CEO, if you're considering a merger or partnership, do your due diligence. Look for these patterns. Don't become victim number 16. She stepped away from the podium, away from bomb. The reporters erupted with questions, but Vanessa ignored them. She walked out of the conference room and went straight to her office, where Ethan was watching the press conference on her computer. "That was either brilliant or suicidal," he said. "Probably both." Vanessa collapsed into her chair. "What happens now?" "Now we find out if exposure is enough to stop them, or if we just made ourselves bigger targets." They didn't have to wait long for the answer. Within 2 hours, Apex issued a statement calling Vanessa's accusations reckless and defamatory, threatening legal action, and claiming all their business practices were fully compliant with securities law. Within 4 hours, 3 major news outlets picked up the story, sending reporters to dig into Apex's history. Within 6 hours, 2 of the companies Vanessa had named publicly confirmed her account of their experiences with Apex. Within 8 hours, the SEC announced they were opening an investigation into Apex Strategic Partners. Vanessa watched it all unfold from her office. exhausted and wired and slightly terrified by what she'd set in motion. Her father called at 9 p.m. "I saw your press conference." "And?" "And you just declared war on a fund that could destroy us. I hope you know what you're doing." "I don't, but I'm doing it anyway." Robert was quiet for a moment. "Your mother would have done the same thing. She never could let injustice slide, even when it cost her." It was the first time Vanessa could remember her father comparing her favorably to anyone, let alone her mother. "Thank you," she said quietly. "Don't thank me. Just survive this. Because if Apex takes down Sterling in retaliation, I'll never forgive you." He hung up. Vanessa sat in the dark office, looking out over the city lights, thinking about survival and forgiveness, and whether they were mutually exclusive. Her phone buzzed. A text from Ethan. "You okay?" "No, but I will be. Maya wants to know if you like pizza. She thinks we should bring you dinner since you're probably not eating." Vanessa felt something warm cutting through the fear. "I like pizza. Good. We'll be there in 20 minutes. Vanessa stood up and walked to her office window. Somewhere out there, Kenneth Vance was probably planning his next attack. Somewhere, lawyers were drafting lawsuits. Somewhere, the machinery of corporate warfare was grinding into motion with her directly in its path. But for the next 20 minutes, she was going to eat pizza with a mechanic and his 8-year-old daughter and pretend that the world wasn't trying to crush her. 23 minutes later, Michelle called up from the lobby. "Ms. Sterling, there's a Mr. Calloway here with a young girl. They have pizza and she's very insistent about seeing you." "Send them up." Ethan and Maya arrived carrying 2 large pizza boxes and a bag of something that smelled like garlic bread. Maya was small for 8, with dark hair and braids and her father's sharp eyes. "Hi," she said, walking straight into Vanessa's office like she owned it. "Dad says you're fighting bad guys and probably forgot to eat. We brought pepperoni and mushroom because Dad said you seemed like a mushroom person." Vanessa couldn't help smiling. "I am definitely a mushroom person." They spread the pizza out on Vanessa's conference table. Maya talked nonstop about her science project, something involving plants and music, while Ethan watched his daughter with an expression that was pure contentment. "So you're my dad's boss?" Maya asked between bites of pizza. "I'm not his boss. We're working together on a project." "What kind of project?" Ethan intervened. "A boring business thing. Eat your pizza." "Business isn't boring. Ms. Chen says business is how the world works, and we should all understand it so we don't get exploited." Maya looked at Vanessa seriously. "Are you exploiting my dad?" "No, definitely not." "Good, because he's really smart and people used to take advantage of that. He doesn't think I know, but I heard Grandma talking about it." Ethan looked mortified. "Maya, maybe we don't need to share every family conversation with—" "It's okay," Vanessa said. "Your dad is very smart, and he's helping me not get exploited by people who are very good at it." Maya nodded, satisfied. "That's what heroes do." After they finished eating, Maya wandered around Vanessa's office, examining everything, the awards on the walls, the books on the shelves, the view from the window. "This is really high up," she said, pressing her hand against the glass. "Does it scare you?" "Sometimes," Vanessa admitted. "Dad says fear is your brain trying to protect you, but sometimes it protects you from the wrong things." "Your dad's pretty wise." "I know. He doesn't think he is, but he is." Maya turned from the window. "Are you going to keep working with him?" "If he wants to keep working with me." "He does. He's been happier the last few weeks, I can tell." Ethan stood up quickly. "Okay, I think that's enough pizza and unsolicited psychological analysis for one night. Come on, Maya. Vanessa has work to do." They packed up the remaining pizza. Maya hugged Vanessa goodbye, a quick, fierce hug that surprised her. And then they were gone. Vanessa stood alone in her office, still feeling the warmth of that hug, understanding something she hadn't quite grasped before. She wasn't just fighting for Sterling anymore. She was fighting for the idea that people like Ethan and Maya could exist in a world that didn't punish decency. That doing the right thing didn't have to mean losing everything. Her phone buzzed with another investor email, another crisis demanding attention. She took a deep breath and got back to work. The next morning, Apex filed a $200 million defamation lawsuit against Vanessa personally and Sterling Capital as a company. Thomas brought her the filing at 8 a.m. They're claiming your press conference caused irreparable harm to their business reputation and their ability to operate. They want damages, a public retraction, and injunctive relief preventing you from making any further statements about them. Vanessa read through the legal filing, each page more aggressive than the last. They weren't just suing, they were trying to silence her completely. Can they win this? In court? Probably not. Truth is an absolute defense to defamation, and everything you said is verifiable. But that's not the point. The point is to drain our resources, damage our reputation, and make you so toxic that no one wants to work with Sterling. So we fight it. Vanessa, this lawsuit is going to cost millions to defend. Even if we win, it'll take years. Years of depositions, negative press, investor uncertainty. Is this really the hill you want to die on? She thought about Kenneth Vance's cold smile, about James Hendricks and the 14 other companies Apex had destroyed, about Maya saying that's what heroes do with absolute certainty. Yes, Vanessa said, this is exactly the hill. Thomas nodded slowly. Then I hope you're ready, because this is going to get ugly. He wasn't wrong. By the end of the week, 2 institutional investors had pulled their money from Sterling, citing reputational concerns. 3 major clients postponed deals pending resolution of the lawsuit. The board called an emergency meeting to discuss Vanessa's leadership. But other things happened too. A reporter from the Wall Street Journal published a deep investigation into Apex's practices that corroborated everything Vanessa had said. 2 former Apex employees came forward with internal documents showing deliberate strategies to hide acquisition mechanisms. The SEC's investigation expanded. The pressure was enormous. But it was working both ways now. Vanessa stood at her office window on Friday night, watching the sun set over Chicago, thinking about how much everything had changed in 5 weeks. She'd gone from a CEO focused on closing deals to someone fighting a war she barely understood. She'd lost investors, gained enemies, and found allies in the most unexpected places. Her phone rang. Ethan. Turn on CNBC. She grabbed her remote and switched on the TV mounted on her wall. A financial analyst was discussing the Apex situation. What we're seeing here is unprecedented, the analyst said. A sitting CEO taking on a private equity fund publicly, risking her entire company to expose what she believes are predatory business practices. Whether you agree with her tactics or not, Vanessa Sterling has fundamentally changed the conversation about corporate accountability. Vanessa muted the TV. How does it feel to be a revolutionary? Ethan asked. Terrifying, exhausting, like I might throw up any second. Yeah, that sounds about right. Ethan, do you think we can actually win this? I don't know, but I think we already changed something that needed changing. That counts. After they hung up, Vanessa stayed at the window watching darkness settle over the city. Somewhere out there, Kenneth Vance was planning his next move. Somewhere, lawyers were building cases. Somewhere, the future was rushing toward her whether she was ready or not. But tonight, in this moment, she wasn't alone. And sometimes that was enough. The lawsuit dragged on for 6 weeks before Kenneth Vance made his next move. Vanessa was in a deposition, her 3rd that month, when Thomas received the call. She watched through the glass wall of the conference room as he stepped into the hallway, his expression shifting from irritation to shock to something that looked like fear. When they broke for lunch, Thomas pulled her aside. Apex just filed an emergency motion. They're asking the court to freeze Sterling's assets pending the outcome of the defamation suit. Vanessa felt the ground tilt beneath her feet. They can't do that. They're arguing that we're at risk of hiding or transferring assets to avoid paying damages if they win. It's a stretch legally, but if the judge grants it even temporarily, we're dead. We can't operate without access to our accounts. When's the hearing? Tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. Vanessa walked to the window of the law firm's conference room. They were 30 floors up in a different building, a different view of the same city. She was so tired of being up high, looking down at a world that seemed determined to destroy her. Call Patricia Hendricks, she said, and Ethan. I need both of them tonight. They met at Sterling's headquarters at 7 p.m. Patricia arrived with 2 associates and a briefcase full of legal precedents. Ethan showed up 20 minutes later, straight from the shop, still wearing grease-stained jeans. Asset freeze? He said, settling into a chair at the conference table. That's aggressive even for Vance. It's also desperate, Patricia added. which means they're not as confident about the defamation case as they want everyone to believe. Or they're trying to force me to settle, Vanessa said. Cut a deal before the SEC investigation uncovers something they can't explain away. Ethan pulled out his laptop. I've been digging into Apex's financial structure, the same shell companies they use to hide acquisitions. They're also using them to move money around in ways that look like tax evasion. If the SEC follows those trails far enough, Vance has bigger problems than a defamation suit. Can we use that tomorrow? Vanessa asked. Patricia shook her head. The asset freeze hearing is about whether Sterling poses a flight risk with its assets. Apex's tax issues aren't relevant to that question. Then what is relevant? Proving that Sterling is financially stable, has no history of asset transfers during litigation, and that Apex's motion is punitive rather than protective. Patricia opened her briefcase. We need documentation of every major financial transaction for the last 3 years, evidence of Sterling's cooperation with Discovery, and testimony about your company's standing in the business community. They worked until 2 a.m., building the defense. Vanessa called in department heads to pull financial records. Thomas coordinated with their accounting firm. Patricia and her associates drafted responses. Ethan sat quietly in the corner, occasionally offering observations about Apex's likely strategy, but mostly just watching Vanessa with an expression she couldn't quite read. At 2:15, when everyone else had left to grab a few hours of sleep before the hearing, Ethan walked over to where Vanessa was still reviewing documents. You should go home, he said. I'm fine. You're running on empty. You've been running on empty for weeks. At some point, you're going to crash. Vanessa looked up at him. I can't afford to crash. Not until this is over. And when is it over, Vanessa? When Apex drops the lawsuit? When the SEC investigation concludes? When every company they've ever targeted gets justice? He sat down across from her. There's no finish line here. You know that, right? I know I started something and I have to see it through. Even if it destroys you? Even if it destroys me? Ethan was quiet for a moment. I used to think like that, after Sarah died. Like if I just kept working, kept pushing, eventually I'd find some endpoint where the pain would stop. But there is no endpoint. There's just the choice you make every day about whether to keep going or let go. I can't let go. Too many people are counting on me. Who? The board members who are ready to vote you out? The investors who pulled their money? Or are you really doing this for yourself because you can't stand the idea of backing down? The words hit harder than Vanessa expected. She wanted to argue, to defend herself, but she was too exhausted to lie. Maybe both, she admitted. Maybe I'm fighting for the right reasons and the wrong reasons and I can't tell them apart anymore. That's honest, at least. Ethan stood up. Come on, I'm driving you home. I have my car, and you're too tired to drive it safely. You can get it tomorrow. Vanessa started to protest, then realized she didn't have the energy. She grabbed her coat and followed him out to his truck, the same rusted pickup she'd ordered towed 2 months ago. The small dent from the tow hook was still visible on the bumper. They drove through empty streets, the city quiet except for the occasional taxi or late-night delivery truck. Vanessa leaned her head against the window, watching Chicago blur past. Do you ever regret leaving finance? She asked. No, best decision I ever made. Even knowing you could have been successful, made millions, built something important. I did build something important. I'm building it every day. It's called being Maya's father. He glanced at her. Success isn't what the business world tells you it is. It's not money or power or having your name in the Wall Street Journal. It's being able to look at yourself in the mirror and not hate what you see. I don't hate what I see. Then why do you look so miserable all the time? Vanessa didn't have an answer for that. Ethan pulled up in front of her building. Get some sleep. Tomorrow's going to be rough regardless, but it'll be worse if you're falling apart. She got out of the truck, then leaned back through the open door. Ethan, why are you really helping me? And don't say it's because you recognize corruption or you want to fix the industry. What's the real reason? He looked at her for a long moment. Because when I see you fighting this hard for something you believe in, even when it's costing you everything, it reminds me that not everyone in this world has given up. And I needed that reminder. Vanessa felt something crack open in her chest. Thank you. Go to bed, Vanessa. She watched him drive away, then went upstairs and collapsed on her couch without bothering to change clothes. Sleep came fast and hard, the kind of dreamless exhaustion that felt like falling into a dark well. Her alarm went off at 6 a.m. She showered, put on her most expensive suit, armor for battle, and headed to the courthouse. The hearing was held in a federal courtroom that smelled like old wood and broken promises. Apex's legal team took up one entire table, 6 lawyers in identical Navy suits, all carrying the same air of entitled confidence. Patricia sat at the defense table with Vanessa and Thomas, looking outnumbered but determined. The judge was a woman in her 50s named Margaret Chen, with a reputation for no-nonsense rulings and impatience with legal theatrics. Apex's lead counsel spoke first, laying out their argument with practiced smoothness. Sterling Capital was facing potential damages in the hundreds of millions. Vanessa Sterling had demonstrated reckless behavior. There was substantial risk of asset dissipation or transfer to avoid liability. Patricia countered with evidence of Sterling's financial stability, its cooperation with all legal processes, and the punitive nature of Apex's motion. Judge Chen listened to both sides without visible reaction, then asked a question that changed everything. "Mr. Reynolds," she said, addressing Apex's attorney, "your motion claims Sterling poses a flight risk with its assets. But hasn't your own client been the subject of an SEC investigation for the past 6 weeks regarding shell company structures and undisclosed ownership transfers?" Reynolds stumbled slightly. "Your Honor, that investigation is ongoing and unrelated to—" "It seems quite related to me. You're asking this court to freeze assets based on alleged risk of improper transfers while your client is under investigation for exactly that behavior." Judge Chen looked at her notes. "Motion denied. Apex Strategic Partners has not met the burden of proof required for emergency asset freeze. If you want to revisit this issue, bring me actual evidence of wrongdoing instead of speculation." The gavel came down. Vanessa felt Thomas grip her arm in relief. Patricia allowed herself a small smile. Across the aisle, Kenneth Vance sat stone-faced, watching Vanessa with cold calculation. Outside the courthouse,